The small apartment smelled like old cigarettes and forgotten dreams. 6-year-old Lily sat quietly in the corner, watching the rain streak down the dirty window. She held her stuffed bunny close to her chest, the same bunny her mother had given her before everything changed. 2 years had passed since her mother died in that terrible car accident. Lily still remembered the day when her stepfather Carlos came home with red eyes and shaking hands, telling her that Mommy wasn't coming back. She was only 4 then, too young to understand death but old enough to feel the emptiness that followed. Carlos wasn't a bad man back then. He used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings and help Lily tie her shoes. But grief and guilt ate away at him like a slow poison. He started drinking more, sleeping during the day, and bringing home people Lily didn't recognize. The pancakes stopped. The help with shoes stopped. The smiles stopped. "Stay in your room when my friends come over," Carlos would tell her, his voice thick with something that made Lily's stomach feel funny. She learned to be quiet as a mouse, to make herself invisible when the strangers came knocking at their door. The apartment got messier as the months passed. Dishes piled up in the sink until they grew fuzzy green things. The refrigerator became empty except for old takeout containers that smelled bad. Lily learned to eat crackers and drink water from the bathroom sink when Carlos forgot to buy food, which happened more and more often. At night she would hear him on the phone, talking in hushed, angry voices about money he owed and people who were getting impatient. The words didn't make sense to her young mind, but the fear in his voice was something she understood perfectly. It was the same fear that lived in her chest every single day. Carlos had lost his job at the auto shop 3 months ago. The bills kept coming, but the money stopped. The people he owed money to weren't the kind who accepted excuses or asked politely for payment. They were dangerous people who solved problems in ways that kept Carlos awake at night, staring at the ceiling, with wide, frightened eyes. "I need more time," he would beg into the phone. "Just give me 2 more weeks and I'll have your money." But they weren't interested in more time. They wanted their $15,000, and they wanted it now. Lily noticed the change in how Carlos looked at her. Before, when he bothered to look at her at all, his eyes held sadness and guilt. Now there was something else there, something that made her want to hide under her thin blanket and pretend she didn't exist. She heard him making different kinds of phone calls now. Quiet conversations where he would glance at her and then turn away, speaking words she couldn't understand but somehow knew were about her. "Yeah, she's small for her age, but healthy," she heard him whisper one night. "Quiet kid, won't cause problems." The way he said it made Lily's skin feel cold. She didn't know what those words meant, but they felt wrong, like when you accidentally step on broken glass and feel the sharp pain before you see the blood. The strangers who visited their apartment started looking at her differently too. They would stare at her with calculating eyes, the way people look at things in store windows, deciding if they want to buy them or not. Lily began having nightmares about being lost in a dark forest, calling for her mother who never answered. She would wake up crying, but Carlos stopped coming to comfort her months ago. Instead, she would hug her bunny tighter and whisper to herself the lullaby her mother used to sing. "Hush now, little one. The angels watch above. Close your eyes, my darling. You're surrounded by love." But love felt like a word from another life, another world where mothers didn't die, and stepfathers didn't look at little girls like they were problems to be solved. The worst part wasn't the hunger, or the fear, or even the loneliness. The worst part was the growing feeling that she was disappearing, becoming less real each day. When was the last time someone had said her name? When was the last time someone had asked her how she felt or what she wanted? Carlos barely spoke to her anymore except to tell her to be quiet or stay out of the way. She was becoming a ghost in her own life, existing but not really living, breathing but not really alive. One particularly cold Tuesday morning, everything changed. Lily woke up to the sound of Carlos pacing back and forth in the living room, talking frantically on his old cell phone. His voice was higher than usual, desperate in a way that made her stomach hurt. "I don't have that kind of money," he was saying. "You know I don't have it." There was a long pause, and Lily could hear the angry voice on the other end of the phone, though she couldn't make out the words. "Please, Carlos begged. Just give me one more week. I'll figure something out. Another pause. Then Carlos's face went white as paper. No, he whispered. No, you can't do that, please. But the phone went dead. Carlos stared at it for a long moment, then threw it against the wall so hard it broke into pieces. He stood there breathing heavy, like he had just run a long race. That's when he turned and looked at Lily with eyes that weren't quite human anymore. They were the eyes of a man who had been pushed so far into a corner that he was willing to do anything to get out. Get dressed, he told her, his voice strange and flat. We're going for a ride. Lily clutched her bunny tighter. Something terrible was about to happen. She could feel it in the air, thick and heavy like the smell before a storm. As she put on her only clean dress and her worn-out shoes, she didn't know that Carlos had already made a phone call that would change her life forever. She didn't know that he had contacted people who dealt in things that shouldn't be bought or sold. She didn't know that in his desperate mind, she had stopped being a little girl and become something else entirely. All she knew was that her stepfather was looking at her like she was the answer to all his problems, and that scared her more than anything else in her short, difficult life. The car ride felt like it lasted forever, even though it was only 20 minutes to the warehouse district. Lily sat in the back seat, holding her bunny so tight her knuckles turned white. Carlos kept looking at her in the rearview mirror with those same strange eyes. Where are we going? She asked in a small voice. Somewhere safe, Carlos lied, but even he didn't believe his own words anymore. The neighborhood they drove into looked like a place where hope went to die. Empty buildings with broken windows stared down at them like dead eyes. Trash blew across the street like tumbleweeds in an old Western movie. Even in the middle of the day, the shadows seemed darker here. Carlos pulled up next to a big gray building. That used to be a factory. Most of the windows were boarded up and the parking lot was full of cracks with weeds growing through them. A few other cars were parked there, all of them old and beat up like Carlos's sedan. Stay here, he told Lily. Don't get out of the car no matter what. But Lily could see him through the windshield as he walked toward a tall, thin man who looked like a scarecrow dressed in expensive clothes. The man's face was sharp and cold like a knife made of ice. Even from inside the car, Lily could tell there was something wrong with him, something that made her want to hide. The two men talked for a few minutes, and she watched Carlos point back at the car. The thin man looked right at her, and Lily felt like a rabbit being watched by a hungry wolf. She slid down in her seat, trying to make herself invisible, but those cold eyes seemed to see right through the car windows and into her soul. After what felt like hours, Carlos came back to the car. His hands were shaking worse than she'd ever seen them. Get out, he said, not looking at her. I don't want to, Lily whispered. Get out now, Carlos shouted, and his voice was so angry and scared that Lily started crying. She climbed out of the car slowly, still clutching her bunny. The thin man walked over to them with steps that reminded Lily of a spider moving across its web. Up close, he was even scarier, with pale skin and eyes that looked like they had never seen sunlight. So this is her, the man said in a voice like sandpaper. His name was Victor, though Lily didn't know that yet. All she knew was that he made her feel like bugs were crawling under her skin. She's small, but that can be an advantage, Victor continued, walking around Lily like she was a car he was thinking about buying. How old did you say? 6, Carlos answered, still not looking at Lily. Victor nodded and knelt down in front of Lily. His breath smelled like cigarettes and something rotten. Open your mouth, he told her. Lily pressed her lips together and shook her head. Do what he says, Carlos said in a voice that didn't sound like him anymore. Lily was so scared she couldn't move. Victor reached out with fingers that felt like ice and grabbed her chin, forcing her mouth open. He looked at her teeth like a veterinarian checking a sick animal. Good teeth. No obvious health problems. She'll do fine. Lily didn't understand what was happening, but every instinct in her 6-year-old body was screaming danger. This was wrong. This was very, very wrong. The price we discussed? Victor asked Carlos. 8,000, Carlos said quietly. You promised. 8,000. Victor pulled out a thick roll of money and started counting bills. Real money. More money than Lily had ever seen in her life. But something about the way he counted it, the way he smiled while he did it, made her stomach feel sick. She comes with nothing, Victor said. No toys, no clothes except what she's wearing, clean slate. But her bunny, Lily said, speaking for the first time since getting out of the car. It was my mama's. Victor looked at the stuffed animal like it was something dirty. No bunny, he said firmly. Where she's going, little girls don't need toys. Lily started crying harder. The bunny was all she had left of her mother. The only thing that still smelled like love and safety and bedtime stories. Carlos finally looked at her, and for just a second she saw the man he used to be. The man who made pancakes and helped, with shoelaces. But then his face went hard again. Give me the bunny, Lily, he said. No. She held it tighter. It's mine. Mama gave it to me. Give it to me right now. Carlos tried to grab the bunny, and Lily ran. She didn't know where she was going, just that she had to get away from the scary man and the money and the way Carlos was looking at her like she wasn't his little girl anymore. She didn't get far. Carlos caught her easily and pried the bunny from her fingers while she screamed and fought. Please, she sobbed. Please don't take my bunny, it's all I have. But Carlos threw the bunny in the trunk of his car and slammed it shut. The sound was like a door closing on her old life, on everything that had ever been good and safe and loving. Victor watched all of this with eyes that showed no emotion at all. To him, this was just business. He dealt with crying children every day. They all cried at first, but they learned to stop. The money, he said to Carlos, holding out the cash. Carlos reached for it with hands that shook like autumn leaves. This was it. Once he took that money, there was no going back. Once he took that money, Lily would disappear into a world he didn't want to think about. But $15,000 in debt to dangerous people didn't leave room for conscience. His own life was on the line. Carlos took the money. Pleasure doing business, Victor said with a smile that never reached his eyes. But just as Victor reached for Lily's hand, something unexpected happened. A voice called out from across the parking lot. Wait. All three of them turned to see another man walking toward them. This one was different from Victor. He was bigger, with kind eyes and a face that looked like it knew how to smile. But right now, he wasn't smiling. Right now, he looked like a man who was about to do something that could change everything. Lily didn't know that this stranger's name was Detective Morrison, or that he had been watching this terrible transaction from his car. She didn't know that he was supposed to be undercover, gathering evidence for a big investigation. She didn't know that interfering with this sale could ruin months of police work. All she knew was that when this new stranger looked at her, she didn't feel like prey anymore. For the first time in months, someone was looking at her like she was a real person, a real little girl who deserved to be protected. I said wait, Morrison repeated, walking closer. His hand was near his jacket and Victor noticed. This is a private transaction, Victor said carefully. Yeah, Morrison replied, his eyes never leaving Lily. I can see that, and I'm making it my business. The air became thick with tension. Carlos looked confused and scared. Victor looked angry and suspicious. And Lily looked hopeful for the first time in 2 years. Something was about to change. Something big. Detective Morrison felt his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. 3 years of police training told him to stay back, watch, and gather evidence. But 3 years of missing his own daughter told him something completely different. Hannah would have been 9 years old now if the cancer hadn't taken her. She would have had the same scared look in her eyes that he saw in this little girl's face. She would have needed someone to step up and protect her. Morrison had been tracking Victor's operation for 8 months, pretending to be a buyer interested in information and illegal goods. He was supposed to be building a case that would shut down the entire trafficking ring and save dozens of children. But all of that seemed meaningless now, looking at this one terrified little girl who needed help right now, not after months of investigation. I'll take her, Morrison said, pulling out his wallet. The words came out before he could stop them. Victor's cold eyes got even colder. This is a private sale, Find your own merchandise. Double, Morrison said, his voice steady even though his world was falling apart inside. I'll pay double what you agreed on. Carlos looked back and forth between the two men like he was watching a tennis match. In his desperate mind, this was even better than he had hoped. More money meant he could pay off his debts and maybe have something left over. 16,000, Carlos said quickly. Cash. Victor's face twisted with anger. He didn't like being outbid, especially by someone he didn't know. In his world, reputation was everything, and letting strangers interfere with his business was dangerous. Who are you? Victor asked Morrison. Morrison thought fast. He had been using the identity of a small-time criminal named Tony Breslin for months. It was a good cover, complete with fake ID and a history that would check out if anyone looked into it. Tony Breslin, Morrison said. I deal in specialty items for clients who pay premium prices. This one caught my eye. He hated talking about Lily like she was a thing, but it was the only way to make this work. Inside, he was screaming at himself. For breaking cover, for risking everything, for probably destroying months of investigative work. But when he looked at Lily, clutching the spot where her bunny used to be, none of that mattered. Victor studied Morrison's face, looking for signs of deception. Morrison had been undercover long enough to keep his expression neutral, even though his heart was breaking for this little girl. You have that kind of cash on you? Victor asked. Morrison nodded. It was every penny of his savings, money he had been keeping for a memorial garden for Hannah. He had planned to plant flowers there, the kind Hannah loved, with a small bench where he could sit and remember her laugh. Now he was going to spend it all on saving a child who reminded him so much of his lost daughter that it physically hurt to look at her. Morrison walked to his car and came back with a thick envelope. He counted out $16,000 in hundreds, money that represented 3 years of careful saving and planning. Carlos's eyes got big at the sight of all that cash. It was more money than he had ever seen at one time. Enough to pay his debts and disappear somewhere far away where dangerous people couldn't find him. Victor was still suspicious, but money talked louder than suspicion. 16,000 was a lot more than the 8 he had planned to pay Carlos. The deal was with me first, Victor said to Morrison. Professional courtesy says I should get first option. Morrison pulled out another $1,000. 17, he said. Final offer. Victor looked at the money, then at Morrison, then at Lily. The girl was worth maybe 5,000 on the market, 8 at most. 17 was way more than she was worth to him financially. But letting a stranger take his merchandise set a bad precedent. Then again, $17,000 was $17,000. Deal, Victor said. Morrison handed over the cash and Victor counted it carefully. When he was satisfied, he looked at Carlos. She's his now, not my problem anymore. Carlos took the money from Victor with shaking hands. He looked at Lily one last time and for a second she saw something like regret in his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then he got in his car and drove away without looking back, leaving Lily alone with 2 strangers in a parking lot that smelled like broken dreams. Victor also got ready to leave, but first he gave Morrison a business card. If you need anything else, call me, he said. I can get you whatever you want as long as you can pay for it. Morrison took the card, knowing it was evidence he might need later. If he could salvage this investigation somehow, Victor's contact information would be valuable. Victor got in a black SUV and drove away, leaving Morrison alone with Lily in the empty parking lot. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Lily looked up at this strange man who had just bought her like a used car, wondering what horrible things he was going to do to her. She had heard whispered stories about what happened to children who disappeared, stories that gave her nightmares. Morrison knelt down so he was at eye level with her. Up close he could see that she had probably been pretty once, before hunger made her thin and fear made her eyes old beyond her years. What's your name, sweetheart? He asked gently. Lily was surprised by his kind voice. The scary man Victor had talked to her like she was a dog. Carlos had stopped using her name months ago. This stranger was the first person in a long time to speak to her like she was a real person. Lily, she whispered. That's a beautiful name, Morrison said. Lily, I know you're scared and I know you don't understand what just happened, but I want you to know that you're safe now. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again. Lily wanted to believe him, but believing in adults had brought her nothing but pain. Are you going to hurt me? She asked in a voice so small it was barely there. Morrison felt something break inside his chest. How could anyone look at this tiny, frightened child and want to cause her harm? No, sweetheart, he said firmly. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to take care of you. I promise. It was a promise that would change both their lives forever. Can I have my bunny back? Lily asked hopefully. Morrison's heart sank. The bunny was gone, driven away in Carlos's car, along with the last piece of Lily's old life, but he couldn't tell her that. Not yet. We'll figure something out, he said instead. Right now, let's get you somewhere warm and safe. Are you hungry? Lily nodded. She was always hungry. Okay then, Morrison said, standing up and offering her his hand. Let's go get you something to eat. Lily looked at his hand for a long moment. Taking it meant trusting him, and trust was something she had almost forgotten how to do. But what choice did she have? She put her small hand in his big one, and together they walked toward his car. Neither of them knew what came next, but for the first time in 2 years, Lily felt like maybe, just maybe, things might be okay. Morrison helped her into the passenger seat and buckled her seatbelt carefully. As he started the car, he realized he had just thrown away his career, his investigation, and probably his future with the police force. But looking at Lily in the rearview mirror, her small face full of cautious hope, he knew he had made the right choice. Some things were more important than following the rules. Morrison drove for 20 minutes before stopping at a small diner on the edge of town. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the world go by through the window. She had never been this far from her old neighborhood before, and everything looked different here, cleaner, safer. Are you okay? Morrison asked as they pulled into the parking lot. Lily nodded, even though she wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. The diner was warm and bright, with red booths and black and white checkered floors. It smelled like coffee and bacon and home-cooked meals. Lily couldn't remember the last time she had been in a restaurant. Morrison chose a booth in the back corner where they could have some privacy. Lily climbed onto the red vinyl seat and looked around with wide eyes. Everything seemed huge to her small frame. A waitress with kind eyes and gray hair came over with menus. "What can I get you folks?" she asked with a smile. Morrison looked at Lily. "What sounds good to you, sweetheart?" Lily stared at the menu, but the words swam together. She had never learned to read very well because she had missed so much school. "I don't know," she whispered. "How about pancakes?" Morrison suggested. "With chocolate chips?" Lily's eyes lit up for the first time since he had met her. "Really? Really? And orange juice, and maybe some bacon too." When the food came, Lily ate like she hadn't seen a meal in weeks, which wasn't far from the truth. Morrison watched her carefully, his heart breaking at how thin she was, how her clothes hung loose on her small frame. "Slow down, sweetheart," he said gently. "The food isn't going anywhere." But Lily couldn't help herself. Good food had been so rare in her life that her body didn't trust it would be there later. While she ate, Morrison tried to figure out what to do next. He couldn't take her to the police station without blowing his cover completely. Victor's operation was huge, and if Morrison's real identity was discovered, not only would the investigation be ruined, but both he and Lily could be in serious danger. He also couldn't just show up at children's services with a 6-year-old girl and no explanation of where she came from. That would raise questions he couldn't answer without revealing the trafficking ring and his role in it. Morrison had a cabin in the mountains, a place he had bought after Hannah died. It was isolated and peaceful. Somewhere he went to escape the pain of losing his daughter. Maybe he could take Lily there while he figured out a long-term plan. "Lily," he said carefully, "I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" She nodded, syrup on her chin. "Do you have any other family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone who might be worried about you?" Lily shook her head. "Just Carlos, but he..." She trailed off, not knowing how to explain what had just happened. I know, Morrison said gently. Carlos isn't going to be taking care of you anymore. Is he coming back? Lily asked, and Morrison was surprised to hear hope in her voice. Despite everything, Carlos had been the only family she had known for 2 years. No, sweetheart, he's not coming back. Lily absorbed this information quietly. Part of her felt sad, but a bigger part felt relieved. Where am I going to live? She asked. Morrison took a deep breath. I have a house up in the mountains. It's quiet and safe with lots of trees and birds. Would you like to stay there for a while? Lily considered this. She didn't really have a choice, but at least this man was asking her opinion instead of just telling her what was going to happen. Will you be there too? She asked. Yes, Morrison promised. I'll be right there with you. Okay, Lily said in a small voice. After they finished eating, Morrison took Lily to a department store to buy her some clothes. She had never been shopping before, at least not anywhere nice like this. She held his hand tightly as they walked through the bright aisles. In the children's section, Morrison helped her pick out some basic clothes: jeans and t-shirts, a warm jacket, pajamas, underwear, socks, everything she needed to start over. Can we get a stuffed animal? Lily asked hopefully, looking at a display of teddy bears and dolls. Morrison remembered the bunny that Carlos had taken away. Of course. Pick out whatever you want. Lily looked at all the choices for a long time before settling on a small brown bear with kind eyes. This one, she said. What are you going to name him? Morrison asked as they walked to the checkout. Bear, Lily said seriously, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Morrison smiled for the first time in hours. Bear is a perfect name. The drive to the cabin took another hour. Lily fell asleep in the car, clutching Bear to her chest. Morrison kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, still not quite believing what he had done. The cabin was exactly what he had told her it would be. Small and cozy, surrounded by tall pine trees with a little stream running behind it. It was the kind of place where hurt souls went to heal. Morrison carried the sleeping Lily inside and tucked her into the guest bedroom. She barely stirred as he covered her with a warm quilt. For the first time since Hannah died, there was a child sleeping in his house. It should have felt strange, but instead it felt right in a way that surprised him. While Lily slept, Morrison sat at his kitchen table and tried to figure out what to do next. He couldn't stay undercover indefinitely, which meant the investigation into Victor's trafficking ring would eventually fall apart. Dozens of other children would remain trapped in a system that treated them like merchandise. But looking at the closed door of the room where Lily was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, Morrison knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes saving one life was more important than any investigation. He called his supervisor at the police department. Morrison here, he said when Captain Rodriguez answered. I need to take some personal leave. Family emergency. How long? Rodriguez asked. I'm not sure yet, maybe a few weeks. It wasn't exactly a lie. Lily was family now, even if the paperwork hadn't been signed yet. Over the next few days, Morrison and Lily began to build a routine. He would make breakfast while she played with Bear. They would take walks in the woods behind the cabin, where Lily marveled at squirrels and birds and flowers she had never seen before. Slowly, carefully, Morrison began to ask questions about her life before. Lily told him about her mother, who used to sing lullabies and make the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the world. She told him about Carlos, who used to be nice but changed after her mother died. She didn't tell him about the hunger or the fear, or the men who looked at her like she was something to be bought. Those memories were too dark and scary to share yet. Morrison told her about Hannah, showing her pictures of a little girl with bright eyes and a big smile. He told Lily how much he had loved his daughter and how much he missed her. Do you think they know each other? Lily asked one evening as they sat on the cabin's front porch. My mama and your Hannah? Morrison felt tears prick his eyes. I think they probably do, he said, and I think they're both watching over us. Maybe they planned for us to find each other, Lily said with the wisdom that sometimes comes from children who have seen too much. Maybe they did, Morrison agreed. Meanwhile, back in the city, Victor was getting suspicious. The man who called himself Tony Breslin had disappeared completely after buying the girl. That wasn't normal behavior for his clients, who usually came back for more. Victor started making phone calls, asking questions, trying to track down this mysterious buyer who had paid so much for one small girl. The more he investigated, the more worried he became. Something wasn't right about Tony Breslin. And in Victor's world, when something wasn't right, people ended up dead. But up in the mountains, Morrison and Lily were building something that neither of them had expected to find. They were building a family. It wouldn't be easy. Lily still had nightmares sometimes, waking up crying for her mother or her lost bunny. Morrison still felt guilty about abandoning his investigation and potentially letting other children suffer. But as the days passed and Lily's smiles became more frequent, as her laughter began to fill the empty spaces in the cabin, Morrison knew that some risks were worth taking. Some promises were worth keeping, even if they cost you everything else. 2 years later, the little cabin in the mountains had become a real home. The walls that once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and conversation. Lily, now 8 years old, had grown stronger and healthier, her cheeks full of color and her eyes bright with hope. She had chosen a new name for herself 6 months after coming to live with Morrison. "I want to be called Sophie," she announced one morning over pancakes. "It means wise, and I think I'm getting wiser every day." Morrison smiled and ruffled her hair. "Sophie it is then. It's a beautiful name for a beautiful, wise girl." The transformation in both of them had been remarkable. Sophie had learned to read and was now devouring books like a hungry person eating bread. She discovered she had a gift for painting, creating colorful pictures of the mountains and trees around their home. Most importantly, she had learned to trust again. Morrison had officially retired from the police force, though not before helping his colleagues plan one final operation against Victor's trafficking network. Using the contact information he had gathered during his undercover work, the police were able to coordinate a massive raid that rescued 17 children and arrested most of Victor's organization. Victor himself had escaped in the confusion, but his network was destroyed. 17 children went home to families who loved them or were placed with caring foster families. It wasn't the outcome Morrison had originally planned, but it was still a victory. The legal process of adopting Sophie had been complicated. Morrison had to work with victim advocacy groups and sympathetic social workers who understood that sometimes the system's rules needed to bend to serve justice. It took 18 months of paperwork, interviews, and court appearances, but finally, it was official. Sophie Elizabeth Morrison was her legal name now. She kept her original middle name to honor her birth mother, but Morrison was her father in every way that mattered. On the second anniversary of the day he found her in that warehouse parking lot, Sophie painted a special picture. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun, with mountains in the background and a small brown bear sitting nearby. "Tell me about your painting," Morrison said as they hung it on the refrigerator next to all her other artwork. "That's when you chose me," Sophie explained, pointing to the taller figure. "And that's when I chose you back." She pointed to the smaller figure. Bear was there too, even though I didn't know him yet. Morrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You know what, sweetheart? I think you choosing me was the best thing that ever happened to me." Sophie grinned, showing the gap where she had lost her first tooth the week before. "Me too, Daddy." The word Daddy still made Morrison's heart skip a beat. Sophie had started using it about a year ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she realized he wasn't going anywhere. Life in the mountains was good for both of them. Sophie attended the local elementary school where she quickly made friends and impressed her teachers with her determination to catch up on everything she had missed in her early years. She was especially good at art and reading, though math still gave her some trouble. Morrison had found work as a security consultant, using his law enforcement experience to help businesses protect themselves. It paid well enough to support their small family, and it let him be home when Sophie got off the school bus each day. They had routines now, the kind of comfortable, boring routines that make a house feel like a home. Morning pancakes on weekends, evening walks with Bear, who was still Sophie's constant companion. Bedtime stories where Morrison would make up adventures about brave little girls who saved the day. But the best times were the quiet moments when Sophie would crawl into Morrison's lap while he read the newspaper, or when she would help him cook dinner, standing on a step stool to reach the counter. "Daddy," she said one evening as they made spaghetti together, "do you ever miss your old job?" Morrison considered the question carefully. He did miss some parts of police work. He missed the feeling of making a difference, of putting bad guys in jail where they couldn't hurt innocent people. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I found something more important than my old job." "What's that?" Sophie asked, stirring the sauce with intense concentration. "You," Morrison said simply. "Taking care of you is the most important job I've ever had." Sophie beamed at him with tomato sauce on her nose. Morrison had started volunteering with organizations that helped rescued children, using his experience to guide other kids through the difficult process of healing from trauma. It was his way of honoring the children he hadn't been able to save directly. Sophie sometimes came with him to these meetings, and Morrison was amazed at how naturally she connected with other kids who had been through terrible things. She had a gift for making them feel understood and less alone. "I remember being scared like that," she would tell them. "But it gets better. You just have to find the right person to take care of you." One day, Morrison got a call that changed everything. Captain Rodriguez called to tell him that Victor had finally been caught. "We got him trying to cross the border into Mexico," Rodriguez explained. "He had a new operation set up, but we were ready for him. He's looking at life in prison without parole." Morrison felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. For 2 years he had worried that Victor might somehow track them down, might try to hurt Sophie or take her back. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "Some of the kids we rescued from his new operation asked about you. Word gets around, in that world, about cops who care enough to risk everything for a child. They wanted me to tell you thank you." After he hung up the phone, Morrison found Sophie in her room working on a new painting. This one showed a little girl planting flowers in a garden while a man watched from nearby. "Victor's been arrested," Morrison told her gently. They had talked about Victor before, about how some bad people who hurt children were still out there, but that they were safe now. Sophie looked up from her painting. "Does that mean he can't hurt anyone else?" "That's exactly what it means," Morrison said. Sophie nodded seriously, then went back to her painting. "Good. Kids should be safe." That evening, as Morrison tucked Sophie into bed, she asked him the question she asked every night. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" "I'll always be here," Morrison promised, just like he did every night. "Even when I'm grown up?" "Even when you're grown up? Even when you're old and gray and have kids of your own? I'll always be your daddy, and you'll always be my Sophie." Sophie smiled and hugged Bear close to her chest. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky." As Morrison turned off the light and quietly closed Sophie's door, he thought about how different his life had become. 2 years ago, he was a lonely detective living with grief and regret. Now he was a father, with a daughter who brought joy and purpose to every single day. He walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the mountains silhouetted against the starry sky. Somewhere out there, Hannah was at peace. Somewhere out there, Sophie's birth mother was at peace too. And here in this little cabin, 2 people who had found each other in the darkest moment were building something beautiful together. Morrison had learned that family isn't just about blood or genetics. Sometimes family is about choosing to love someone and protect them, and be there for them no matter what. Sometimes family is about 2 broken people healing each other. In his bedroom, Morrison kept a photo on his nightstand. It showed him and Sophie at her school's art show, both of them grinning as she stood next to her winning painting. The painting was titled My Family, and it showed their little cabin surrounded by mountains, with 2 figures holding hands in front of it. At the bottom, in Sophie's careful 8-year-old handwriting, were the words, "This is where love lives." Morrison looked at that photo every night before he went to sleep, and every morning when he woke up. It reminded him that sometimes the Worst days of your life can lead to the best days of your life. Sometimes a stranger becomes family. Sometimes choosing to do the right thing, even when it costs you everything, leads to getting back everything you never knew you needed. And sometimes, in a world full of darkness, two people can find each other and create their own light. Carlos was serving his 15-year sentence in a state prison, where he spent his days thinking about the choice he had made and wishing he could take it back. The money was long gone, spent on debts and drugs and lawyers. But the guilt would last forever. Victor would spend the rest of his life behind bars where child predators were not treated kindly by other inmates. But Morrison and Sophie were living their best life in a little cabin in the mountains, where love grew stronger with each passing day and where the future was as bright as Sophie's smile. Every morning when Sophie woke up and ran to Morrison's room to make sure he was still there, both of them remembered how precious and fragile happiness could be. And every night when Morrison kissed Sophie goodnight and promised to be there in the morning, both of them felt grateful for the day that a stranger chose to become a hero, and a scared little girl learned to trust again. Their story wasn't finished yet. There would be more adventures, more challenges, more moments of joy and growth and discovery.